Welcome to Session 6 of the Preventive Legal Advocacy Virtual Summit. Session 6 is entitled Driving Change, Legislative Efforts to Support Preventive Legal Advocacy and Pre-Petition Programs. Our panelists for this session include Maral Karaccusian, Senior Children and Human Services Deputy for Supervisor Janice Hahn of the LA County Board of Supervisors, Jeff Wright, State Public Defender for the state of Iowa, and Talia AyAy, President and Executive Director of the First Clinic in Washington.
The way that we started it in Iowa was I am an executive branch employee, meaning I am appointed by the governor and I oversee the public defenders, indigent defense, including juvenile indigent defense throughout the entire state. So we had to first have the idea of a pre-filing representation project, and that came through a series of meetings and with stakeholders about what we could do to help our foster care system that at the time was one of the worst in the country as far as removals occurring per capita. So uh, through those meetings, we kind of got involved and learned about some pre-filing representation projects across the country. I'm actually kind of honored that two of those projects are my co-presenters here, and started looking at the way that they were doing things and whether or not it could be something that we could replicate in Iowa and how we would go about doing that. We're in a little bit of a unique situation in Iowa because of our state-run system. We were able to look at things and do things on a statewide basis. And after kind of having the idea, I had to then go and sell the governor's office that it was a good idea. We worked through that process, and then we began having meeting with stakeholders in the House and the Senate to discuss where we were as a state, what we were seeing, where we were running into problems, and why this was a necessary solution to explore in Iowa. Through those meetings, one of the most common questions we got was, how are we going to continue to protect kids? And that's when we were able to discuss a lot of the things that I've heard discussed here today, which is the way that we're not protecting kids right now is actually by removing them. The harm that removal causes children is oftentimes far greater than the harm that they are experiencing inside the homes. And that was a wake-up call for a lot of our legislators who had never really considered that idea before. They just thought, hey, we have our child welfare agency. They go in, they protect kids. Luckily for us, one of our other partners in this project was our what is now HHS, our Health and Human Services Department that operates as our child welfare agency. That department, along with our department, were able to come up with some solutions and convince legislators that it was a good idea. So we worked through the process, worked through the legislative process, one step at a time, and explained and kind of changed minds throughout the legislature that this was a good thing to try, and we were able to get it passed as a statewide project, which is funded through 4E dollars, which we've been able to, once again, that's an advantage of our statewide system. We've been able to draw down 4E dollars to fund this project. So we have a long-term funding stream. That is the 50,000-foot version of how we went through. I just want to give my co-presenters an opportunity to talk about their stories briefly.
Yeah, I can go next. I mean, I think for us, sorry, I know I'm trying to be polite. Because if anyone knows me on this call, on this Zoom, I can talk a lot. But in Los Angeles County, obviously we're, the largest child welfare jurisdiction. And so in the country. So I think we've been trying to chip away at, and it's such a unique position to be working for the Board of Supervisors. And under my boss's leadership, we passed a motion, which is the legislative vehicle within Los Angeles County to figure out a pre-petition. What would that look like? What was a pre-petition advocacy model look like? And fully acknowledging that we have a coalition that has put pressure on the Board of Supervisors to do the right thing. It's called the Reimagine Child Safety Coalition. And, so it was a really cool opportunity to connect with some of our activists and those with lived expertise to kind of say, hey, Board of Supervisors, LA County, what are you doing about this? And so I think we were able to wedge that motion into the county last year, and we've been working in small groups. And there have been, you guys just listen to Perry and what she's doing as a parent partner at Ladle, which is the Los Angeles Dependency Lawyers. Our Children's Law Center has an Expecting and Parenting Youth, pilot that they're doing to work with young people who are in foster care or who have exited foster care or on a pre-petition. But, what does upstream prevention look like? I think that's what we're trying to really philosophically figure out within our child welfare jurisdiction. And, does primary prevention and does prevention like this, this is a question that we philosophically have to answer. Does it belong in a child welfare entity, or do we need to figure those pieces out? So I think what we've been trying to do within LA County is just continue to work within a small collective and a larger collective to gain momentum, to develop a website, to really kind of engage with the state as well. I think we're so beholden to some of the funding streams that come from the feds and the state. So I think if we can figure out a demonstration and a pilot of what it feels like to have upstream, upfront advocacy, it'll be a huge success. And I think if I've said this time and time again, if people like Brad Pitt and people who have the resources and the means to have attorneys at the door before a child, DCFS comes and investigates or comes and knocks on your door, then everyone should have that right. And I think that's always what's my North Star from a policy standpoint. I think it's a cool opportunity to figure out and unpack within the complexities of Los Angeles County. And that's pretty much it. Talia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Talia AyAy again from First Clinic. So we're a little bit different. First Clinic is small. We are a 501c3 nonprofit and consist of really a few attorneys and 2 parents with 2 lived experts. And when we originally started, we were much smaller, just 3 attorneys, 1 lived expert, and all of us still have and had at the time day jobs. We started in July of 2019, and at that time we were operating entirely pro bono, and with that with the idea of if we build it, funding and legislative support would eventually follow and would come. And so it was our Adam Balut, my business partner and one of the creators of the clinic. He's a dreamer, and he really motivated us to keep going. But it did work. And in October of 2020, we received our first funding, and that came from Casey Family Programs. Shout out to Rob Wyman. And that provided our ability to really grow on the administrative side, but was not funding direct work. And then around the same time, in December of 2020, we were able to negotiate a contract with our agency, which would fund us to support parents who had no agency involvement. But that just it didn't feel like enough. And so at the end of December of 2020, we decided we're on a roll. Let's ask the legislature for money. And at the time, we had no idea what we were doing. We were told this is never going to happen. You don't decide a week before the session starts that you want to ask for money. But we connected with a public policy director who said, you are late to the game, but this is a good time to get your names out there, get some practice and prepare for next year. And so she really mentored us and guided us on what we needed to do and who to talk to, because like I said, at the time, we had no idea what we were doing. And so we just started sending out emails and really cold calling people and asking for meetings to legislatures that were like-minded and we felt would support us. And while we met with several people and those meetings were great, nothing really panned out because a lot of these people were already supporting other asks, and so they just didn't want to take anything else on. In the middle of the legislative session of 2020, we were fortunate enough to connect with our local representative who happened to be on the committee for children, youth, and families. And we did our meeting, and she agreed to champion our request, which was for a budget proviso. We connected with our Washington State Office of Public Defense, who's always been extremely supportive of us. They supported our ask. They agreed to be a flow-through entity for that funding, and they assisted us with writing our request. And so by the middle of session, we were able to secure bipartisan support from the House. We were included in the House budget, which was really exciting. But then we were not included in the Senate budget. And so we needed to ask the Senate for an amendment to their budget to include us, which meant that we had to testify. And so we did that. We testified in front of the Senate. We were finally included in the Senate budget and ultimately included in the governor's final budget. And so we were able to receive funding through our state. And in reality, it came at a surprise, and it was unexpected. And it had a lot to do with timing, luck, and the fact that we were ready. We'd been doing asks, we'd been searching for funding, and so this was something that we'd been doing. And I mean, like I said, this was January of 2021. It was a short session, and the state was flush with COVID funds. And in addition to that, we were not asking for a ton of money. We asked for $250,000 a year for 2 years, so a total of $500,000, which compared to what the agency receives is literally nothing. And so that is how we were able to secure legislative funding. At the time of our ask, we had served 81 families. And by the end of our proviso, when our funding ran out in June of 2023, we had served 761 families. And so we were able to utilize that funding to really expand and grow our program, and through that collect data, which we then were able to use to support Washington State Office of Public Defense ask for funding to expand prevention legal advocacy to additional counties throughout the state of Washington. And our hope is that this will just continue to grow, and that this will be something that is in the budget, that prevention and legal advocacy is something that's funded always. And so I saw a question in the chat about what does FIRST do. I'm sorry. FIRST is we provide legal representation and peer support to pregnant people and parents of newborns who are at risk of involvement in our family policing system. And so we're made up primarily of parents representation attorneys and lived experts. And so I do have some tips for you all if you are thinking about doing your own asks, and what we learned along the way. And I would say, know your message. You only have a short period of time to meet with people. And so I think a lot of people call it an elevator pitch. That's a good thing to do. And know your ask. We did not know that. We would go in and we would meet with people, and they would say, this is great. Everything sounds good. We support you. We support what you're doing. What do you want? And we didn't actually know. We had no idea. We had no idea how much money this was going to cost. We're public defenders who are used to being undervalued, and we did that to ourselves. So we undervalued ourselves and asked for a little bit of money, but it worked because we got it. And the other thing I would say is relationships are everything. Utilize your connections. That way you know who to ask. Use your networks and lean on those relationships as much as you can for connections. We were really fortunate to have some amazing connections and board members who were able to connect us to people with inside the government that were able to connect us to other people. And so start asking, and you will find support. And then when you are actually doing your ask, utilize your supporters. We drafted just emails to make the process easier, and sent it to literally everybody that we knew and that supported us, and asked them, please reach out to your legislatures and send these emails and support our ask, support this movement. And I think that worked. And then when you are going in to testify, we were told time and time again, you need to hit them in their head, hearts, and wallets. So utilizing data. When we first were doing this ask, we had data on 30 cases. So not a lot. And we utilized I think at the time, the Children's Bureau had recently sent out a memo that really talked about the importance of high quality legal advocacy and peer support. And so we leaned heavy on that, because at the time we didn't have a lot of our own data. And then stories. Anyone that works in the space knows that that this work is filled with compelling and moving stories. And when we testified in front of this House and Senate, it was our parent with lived experience, Gina Wassermiller, who moved literally everybody to tears by sharing her experience and just strength and hope. And I think it really is what secured our ask. And then wallet. This work has the it can save money. If kids are not in foster care and in court, and if cases are not open, it just makes sense. And so I think right now there's just so much movement for prevention. I think that the public is finally, hopefully, starting to realize that the system is broken and racist and traumatic. And so I'm just really excited that all of you are here, and I will encourage you to just get started. You never know unless you try.
So I think you hit on something that is very important. You talk about heads, hearts, and wallets, and that message needs to be different to each individual that you're talking to. One of the things that we did was have one-on-ones. We of course testified, but one of the most important things was one-on-ones with leadership in both the committee, at the committee level and at the House and Senate leadership level. And those conversations needed to be specifically tailored around what it was that those specific legislators were gonna have interest in. So do your homework, not just on your own project, but on the people who you are talking to. If you find out that there is a certain legislator who is a very strict law and order legislator, then you need to make sure that you're understanding and hitting the high points about what being in foster care means as far as future criminal activity. And I did spend some time on the board of parole, and what we heard over and over and over was, I was a foster kid, I was a foster kid, I was a foster kid. And that message resonates. When you are talking to a group that is interested in law and order, you talk to them about the things that are going to help law and order. And then you talk to those same individuals usually about the importance of families and the family structure, and why it is important to keep the family structure together, and how we can support families. And you hit those things with key members of the legislature about the way in which you're approaching it. And then you have other members of the legislature, easy for me to say, legislature, that you have to hit other things when you're talking to them. You have to talk to them about the importance of making sure that kids get to stay with their families, and that we're making sure, who exactly are the majority of the children who are being pulled out of homes. Where are those people coming from? And you tailor those conversations specifically based on the individual that you're talking to. You can't just walk into it and know everything about your project and expect that you're going to have a successful conversation. You need to have that information too, but most of us who are on this call have that information. You also need to know what it is that legislator is looking for, and what it is that kind of what makes them tick. And having that information is crucial to being able to successfully get things through. I will comment on one other thing. We had judicial branch support with regards to this project as well. But what we are running into now is that judges are asking us over and over and over, well, I don't understand. I don't see any of this stuff happening. And to me, if they're not seeing it, that means the project is working. So that communication, even after the fact, helping them to understand what the numbers are, how many families you're helping, how these people are staying out from being in front of them is going to be helpful in maintaining future support. We passed our initial project in 2020, and then we were able to pass an expansion of the project in 2023 and ensure that our 4E funding would be stable and substantiated for as long as the federal government decides to do 4E funding. So hopefully that's a long time. But I just wanted to make sure that when you're talking about getting legislative support, that is a very important piece of what it is that you're doing, is understanding and selling to the person and the individual legislator themselves.
And I just want to say this because it was something we had, and thanks to Casey Family Programs and leadership within Los Angeles County, we had a data summit last year, and it was interesting because I was like, well, we all know this information. Why are you telling us? And there's clear things in in Los Angeles County. If you're African American or Black and Native American Indian, you have a 1 in 2 chance. There's 50% chance that not 50%, 1 in 2 people will be investigated. And have DCFS come and knock on your door. And when you think about that type of data, I think when we're in rooms like this, we all know the disparities that exist, the racist systems that exist. But I can't tell you how many times when I was in the field, people would be like, what's foster care? And I was like, wait, you don't know what foster care is? You don't know what child welfare is? And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? So I think that's the other piece too. And I think just looking at the global perspective, and I'm very rooted in LA County, but we have a homelessness crisis. We have a housing crisis. We have domestic violence. We have older adults. Like you can just sit here and on any given day, we talk about the silos that exist within LA County, which is just indicative of state and federal governments as well. Where does child welfare fit into the nexus? And I think that's when we talk about prevention and narrowing that door into child welfare, it's also upstream prevention into these other systems. But to forecast and project and have government entities to think that forward, right? If you get families stabilized now and it's a child and family well-being system, if we can really evolve mandated reporters to mandated supporters and have diversion lines, right? The things that we're trying to, chip away at from this global perspective, we will be able to help the systems at large, right? But no elected official who has term limits is going to be like, oh, by the time I'm done in 12 years, this is how I help the system, right? So that's not a good talking point. So that's also something, I think as policy people, as people doing the right thing, working towards justice, it's something that we all know and we should be doing. However, when it comes to those legislators, just to echo what Jeff was saying, we want to tug at their heartstrings, but, they're also thinking, I'm only here for 3 more years. How's this really going to help me? Unless they're thinking about what next is. So that's part of the narrative shift that needs to happen as well. So that's so I wanted to put that out there too.
This is the time when we try to avoid the awkward silence between when questions come in and when we're kind of done with our key. So
I was going to say, so I'm going to jump in and so we've had a couple of comments, not so many questions as of yet. I mean, I want to thank you guys right off the bat. Like you've provided a lot of valuable information on the tips, and I think some real information that you can only glean from having gone through the process, right, and done the work. So thank you guys for that. I'll note, like in the chat, so Kelly Warner just dropped, this is great. She dropped some helpful resources when programs are trying to develop kind of their argument, right, and explaining why keeping children with family is so important. So I would direct everybody to take a look at that because that's valuable. And then I don't know if you guys saw, okay, we have a couple of questions coming in. Well, first, David Hunter was noting, that First Clinic remains, they remain quite inspired by First Clinic as they proceed to set up similar systems in other counties. And you might have touched on it, Tyler, but you all, I mean, First is looking, you're currently in expanding that model throughout additional counties, correct?
Correct. So the funding stream has changed. It is now being provided directly to the Washington State Office of Public Defense, which is was our ultimate goal, because that, I believe, is the best way for this program to be embedded in the system and sustainable. And so Washington State Office of Public Defense is now using that funding to contract so that we can continue the work that we've been doing in the counties that we support, and then has expanded and in contracting with other great providers in other counties so that they can start their own prevention programs. And David Hunter is one of them. So we're really excited. So we are still receiving state funds. It's just not being awarded directly. It's not a flow through anymore. It's going directly to the Office of Public Defense. And then in terms of our data, I think that, so we've worked with over 800 families across the state of Washington. 82% of the families that we work with end up with no removal and no filing of a dependency. And then of the cases that are filed on, a third of those cases have no removal of the child from the family home, either pre-emergency hearing or after. So the prevention model sets families up so that even if the case does go to court, they are in a better position so that they're more likely to be able to maintain their child in home.
And Talia, I know I've seen some of your data sets. Do you all have, is the First Clinic's report officially published yet on any of those data sets?
Officially published, not yet. But I'm actually looking forward to Alex's presentation this afternoon, because I think that I'm hoping she's going to be presenting on some of our data.
Yeah, she is, which will be great. So yeah, stay tuned if you're interested in kind of this data perspective and the data discussion. That's why we included that session today, because that is an important thing for our programs.
Emily, I just want to say one more thing. I think philanthropy can also play a role. Obviously, it's not for sustainability, but I think having philanthropic support is a big entity within the LA County. And the second thing is, like, for us, there's sometimes a disconnect between our California Department of Social Services and Judicial Council. So what can we do? Southern California is pretty big. Do we coalesce around local government to put pressure on the state to kind of talk to each other? So I think those are things too within California, the complexities that we have and the disconnect that we have between the legal and the social services side. And I think it's something that you always have to be mindful of too. That's why I also wanted to share.
And I want to note with respect to all of our panelists on this session and the legislation that they're referencing. So we have all of that legislation is included in that resource library at placohort.org. If you go down to the bottom of the landing page, you'll see where it says Learning Center and then Resource Library. And on that Resource Library page, there's like a searchable collection of a lot of materials. I think I tagged over 600 documents, getting that all put together. But you can find copies of the legislation that they're referencing, as well as some of the materials that they put together in support of that legislation. So all of that is available, and you can always reach out to me directly via email if you'd like copies of that. I certainly spend a lot of time circulating the legislation that these guys handled in their states when I'm contacted about similar efforts in other jurisdictions. So, and let's see, I think there was one last question from Jennifer in the chat. So is Washington's statewide model only focused on newborns?
So the current funding is only provided for the newborn model, but our goal is prevention for all families, all ages. And so we had to start somewhere. This was a population that we chose and that the state is continuing to support, but ultimate goal is all families, all ages.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you for an excellent presentation. We appreciate you sharing your expertise in this area with us today. And with that, we are gonna go, let's see, am I right on my times here? Or am I cutting us early? Bear with me, I've gotten lost in my agenda at the moment. Oh, no, I'm cutting us early. Never mind. If there are if we have any other questions, we can take some of those, because our next session is set to start at 2:10. So we still have about 10 minutes in this one if there are any additional questions. And if not, we can extend the break. Were there any last minute thoughts from you guys, panelists? It's okay if not.
The only thing I would say is feel free to reach out to me, and I think the other panelists as well, if you have any questions about how you can make this work in your area.
Agreed.
Excellent. All right. Thank you guys again. And so we're going to take a little longer break about this one. There's a couple more things happening in the chat, but we'll take a little bit of a longer break this time. So long stretch break, time for coffee and everything else. And we will be back at 2:10.